She stood her ground, right in front of the inspector. Her voice was quiet, but it was unbreakable. "He stays." The manager, Ms. Evans, didn't shout. She didn't even look angry, just cold, final. "You're terminated. A lifetime of service, 6 years building this sanctuary, all erased in 2 words. Clara's hands didn't even shake. She simply untied her apron, folded it with the precision of a flag, and placed it on the counter. Then she walked out. Not because she broke a rule, but because she upheld a code. The code that says, you don't leave your wounded behind. What Clara didn't know was that a teenager's phone in the corner had captured the whole thing. And what the manager didn't know was that a call had just been made to a man who never, ever left his Marines behind. Before the lunch specials could even be written on the chalkboard, the ground outside began to shake. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the sound of payback, rolling in on a wave of diesel engines. Clara Foster received the declaration of war with the unreadable calm of a soldier on watch. At 52, her spine was a steel rod forged by 22 years in the United States Air Force. She had guided logistics in places where a misplaced comma on a manifest could mean the difference between life and death. A petty tyrant with a clipboard wasn't going to rattle her. To the world, this was a cafe. To Clara, it was a forward operating base. The front door was the entry control point. The counter was the command post, and the patrons, a collection of active duty soldiers, seasoned veterans, and their families, were her squadron. Her mission, since trading her uniform for an apron, had been simple: to fix the most broken supply chain she had ever encountered. The one that was supposed to connect these heroes back to the world they had fought for. This place, nestled just outside the main gate of Fort Matthews, was her life's work built from memory and honor. The walls didn't have generic art. They held the soul of the base. Signed lithographs from A-10 pilots and C-130 crews hung next to a sprawling corkboard she called the Wall of Honor. It was a chaotic, beautiful mosaic of faded photos. A young private from the 1980s grinning in Berlin. A female mechanic in desert camo standing before a Black Hawk. A group of young Marines celebrating their return from Fallujah. Each picture was a contract, a promise. And Clara knew every name, every story, every sacrifice represented on that wall. She wasn't just their barista. She was their historian, their advocate, the keeper of their legacy. This was the driving force behind Operation Co-Pilot, her silent, relentless initiative to leave no one behind. She saw the lost look in the eyes of the young men and women fresh out of the service, their discipline and skills suddenly useless in a world that didn't understand their language. She had seen it just last year with a kid, a former Army truck driver who had been dishonorably discharged from 3 different jobs in 6 months. He had drifted into her cafe one morning, smelling of whiskey and defeat, his anger a shield for his pain. Clara had let him talk for an hour, his story a tangled mess of frustration and failure. When he was done, she didn't offer platitudes. She offered a lifeline. She picked up the phone and called Gus, a 75-year-old Navy Seabee, a gruff, no-nonsense legend who had built half the county with his own 2 hands. "Gus," she'd said, her voice firm, "I've got one of ours here. He's lost his convoy. He needs a new route." The next day, the kid sat across from Gus, and the old Seabee didn't see a failure. He saw a soldier who knew how to follow orders and work until a job was done. He hired him on the spot. Today, that kid was Gus's foreman, his hands steady, his eyes clear. He was a leader again. Clara hadn't just saved a job, she had salvaged a soul. That was the mission. The coffee was just the cover story. The bell above the door chimed, a soft, apologetic sound, and Ben Carter entered. He moved like a man trying to take up as little space in the world as possible. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by the sun and sand of a place thousands of miles away. At his side, his German shepherd, Ranger, moved with the quiet dignity Ben lacked. The dog was his anchor, his living shield against a world that felt too loud, too bright, too close. Ranger's intelligent eyes swept the room, cataloging every person, every sound, before he gently guided Ben toward the secluded corner booth. A silent ritual they performed every morning. The dog's red vest, with its bold service dog lettering, was a clear signal, a request for space that was always honored in this sanctuary. Ben carried the war in the tremor of his hands, in the way he stared at the tabletop, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Clara saw it all. She nodded to him, a silent exchange that conveyed a volume of understanding. "You're safe here. I've got the watch." His usual large black coffee was already brewing. It was this sacred, unspoken contract that Mr. Harrison, in his profound ignorance, chose to violate. His eyes, predatory and cold, scanned the room and locked onto the dog. Ranger, sensing the hostile gaze, shifted his position, placing his body squarely between Ben and the approaching threat. A cruel, self-satisfied smile crept across Harrison's face. He had found it. The perfect tool to dismantle this place he so clearly despised. He strode toward the booth, his clipboard held out like a charging lance. "No," he barked, the word cracking through the cafe's morning hum like a whip. "Absolutely not. No animals. This is an immediate and gross violation of the health code. Get it out." The words struck Ben like a physical blow. He flinched, his body curling inward as if to absorb the impact. The color drained from his face, and his tremor intensified, a visible earthquake of anxiety. Ranger let out a low, mournful whine, the sound a desperate plea, and pressed his head hard against his owner's trembling leg. The quiet hum of the cafe died. Spoons stopped stirring. Conversations evaporated. The sanctuary's perimeter had been breached. The air was now hostile territory. Clara placed the glass coffee pot down on its warmer with a firm, deliberate click. She turned, and the friendly cafe owner was gone. In her place stood Master Sergeant Foster. Her eyes were chips of ice. Her face was set like granite. She was on duty, and her territory was under attack. With the calm precision of a bomb disposal expert, Clara moved from behind her counter. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She simply moved into the space between the inspector and the veteran, creating a human perimeter. Her presence alone shifted the gravity in the room. "Sir," she began, her tone devoid of emotion but carrying the weight of command, "this is a designated service animal, and as such, he is a vital piece of medical equipment for this veteran. Under federal law, he is not a pet. He is an accommodation. You are as welcome to ask him to leave as you would be to ask a man to leave his wheelchair at the door." She was not pleading. She was educating, drawing a clear, hard line based on law and decency. Harrison's face purpled with indignation. He was a man unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by a woman running what he considered little more than a greasy spoon. "That is your interpretation," he spat, his voice rising. "My interpretation, as a duly appointed agent of the state, is that this is a direct and flagrant violation. This establishment is unsanitary." He was no longer just an inspector. He was an accuser, a prosecutor, and he was trying this case in the court of public humiliation. The bell on the door chimed, slicing through the tension. In walked Ms. Evans, the regional manager for the commercial real estate firm that held the deed to the building. She was a woman encased in a perfectly tailored gray suit, her ambition a palpable aura around her. Her eyes, sharp and perpetually scanning for threats, took in the scene in a fraction of a second. The furious inspector, the cowering veteran, the defiant owner. A jolt of pure, undiluted panic shot through her. Her mind, a finely tuned machine of corporate risk assessment, went into overdrive. The warnings from her boss in Chicago echoed in her ears. Avoid scenes, mitigate liability, protect the brand. She saw a flowchart of disaster. The man in the suit was a state official, a source of fines, legal trouble, and public sanction. The man in the corner was an unknown variable, a potential lawsuit. And Clara, the tenant, was the fuse, a rogue element refusing to bow to a clear and present danger. In the cold, brutal calculus of her world, empathy was a weakness and compassion a liability. A flicker of something human, a memory of a time before her soul was laminated by corporate policy, tried to surface but was ruthlessly suppressed. Survival was everything. She had fought too hard and sacrificed too much to let her career get torpedoed by a dog in a diner. She made her decision. "Clara, what is going on here?" she demanded, her voice a sharp crackle of authority. She marched forward, her heels clicking like tiny hammers on an anvil. Siding with Harrison was the path of least resistance, the safest bet. The inspector is right. This is an unacceptable risk. Our insurance, our legal standing, it cannot be compromised. The dog must be removed, immediately. The ultimatum was delivered like a sentence. It was cold, impersonal, and absolute. The cafe, already silent, seemed to fall into a vacuum. Ben Carter, the veteran at the heart of the storm, began to disentangle himself from the booth. Shame was a heavy cloak, and he was ready to pull it over himself and vanish, to erase his own presence as he had been trained to do when he was a liability. But Clara's hand shot out, not touching him, but hovering just above his shoulder. A shield of pure will. She held him in place with her gaze alone. Then she turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto Ms. Evans. The cafe owner was gone. The master sergeant was making her final stand. "Ms. Evans," Clara said, and her voice, though quiet, was forged from iron. "I took an oath once, an oath to a code. That code says you hold the line. It says you protect your people. It says you do not abandon your post, and you do not abandon your wounded." She paused, letting the words sink in, a stark contrast to the corporate jargon that had just polluted the air. "That young man over there is one of my people. This cafe is my post, and I will not, under any circumstances, surrender my post or my people to an act of bureaucratic cowardice." She then shifted her piercing gaze to Harrison. Or to a bully. It was a declaration of values, a line drawn not in the sand, but in the bedrock of honor. Ms. Evans's face, contorted by fear, now hardened into a mask of cold rage. This was insubordination. This was chaos. This had to be crushed. "Then you are terminated," she snapped, the words sharp and final as a guillotine's blade. "Your lease is voided for breach of compliance. I want you off this property, now." As the shock settled over the silent onlookers, Clara simply nodded. There was no argument, no plea. She walked behind the counter, her movements deliberate and graceful. She untied the strings of her apron, the one she had put on every morning for 6 years. She folded it with the precise, reverent motions of a color guard folding a nation's flag. A mission had ended. She placed it on the counter. As she turned to leave, her eyes met those of Maya, the teenager in the corner booth, daughter of a man whose life Clara had helped save. The girl's face was a mask of furious tears, In her hands, her phone was held steady, its small, dark lens capturing every single unforgivable second. It was a silent witness, a digital memory that would not forget. Clara gave the girl a nearly imperceptible nod, a transfer of command. Then, leaving her keys, her career, and her sanctuary behind, she walked out into the sunlight, her head held high, leaving a stunned cafe and a brewing firestorm in her wake. Clara Foster drove away from the landing strip not in a blaze of fury, but in a cocoon of profound, ringing silence. It was the quiet that follows an explosion, the eerie calm of the adrenaline crash. She didn't feel defeated. She felt aligned. For the first time in years, the disciplined master sergeant and the compassionate cafe owner had merged into one, and they had acted with a single, unified purpose. She had held her ground. The cost was catastrophic, but the integrity of the position was intact. She pulled into her small driveway, walked into her quiet house, and placed her keys in the ceramic bowl on the entryway table, the same way she had every day for 6 years. Her eyes fell on a framed photograph on the wall. Her and her old Air Force maintenance crew, a grimy, smiling group of kids, arms slung over each other's shoulders in front of a C-5 Galaxy. They were her people. Ben Carter was her people. There was no difference. In that moment, she knew she would make the same decision 1,000 times over. She had lost her business, but she had not lost herself. She was completely unaware that she was no longer just Clara Foster. In the digital ether, she was already becoming a symbol. The weapon that would launch her story into the stratosphere was a shaky 60-second video uploaded from the phone of a teenager named Maya. With a heart full of righteous loyalty, Maya hit post. The video, raw and unfiltered, landed on the local Fort Matthews community Facebook page with the force of a lit match on dry tinder. For the first 30 minutes, it was a local fire, shared frantically between military families who recognized the injustice in their very bones. It was passed through the digital jungle drums of the spouse networks, the private messaging groups where the real news of the base was shared long before it hit any official channel. Then, the fire jumped the containment line. A retired Marine gunner running a popular irreverent veteran news page called The Guidon saw it. He didn't just share it, he weaponized it. He gave it a headline that was pure rocket fuel. Watch, soulless corporate exec fires Air Force vet for defending a Marine and his hero dog. That's when the wildfire went national. The share button became a battering ram. The video didn't just rack up views, it detonated, sending shrapnel of outrage across every social media platform. It was a tidal wave of digital fury. Comments poured in by the tens of thousands. A Gold Star mother from Ohio wrote, "That woman, Clara, is who we pray our children meet when they come home." A Vietnam veteran from California typed, "Same story, different decade. God bless her for standing up." A young active duty soldier in Korea commented, "That's what honor, courage, and commitment actually looks like." Clara Foster's quiet act of defiance had unified a vast, disparate tribe. She had become their champion. Miles away, in a sterile, glass-walled office in Chicago, Ms. Evans was living a waking nightmare. Her pristine corporate world was collapsing. The phones at the regional headquarters had become instruments of torture, a relentless shriek of public fury. Her email inbox was a digital flash flood, thousands of messages pouring in, a torrent of hatred that buried her carefully curated professional life in digital mud. Stand with Clara was mocking her from the top of the Twitter trending list. Her boss, A man who viewed the world in spreadsheets and stock prices had called her. He hadn't yelled. It was worse. His voice was a blade of ice, promising consequences she could not yet imagine. She sat frozen in her ergonomic chair, watching the video of herself on a news website. She saw her own face, a mask of cold panic, her voice spitting the words that had now made her infamous. The brand she had been tasked to protect was now inextricably linked to her own face, an avatar of corporate cruelty for millions to despise. The absolute control she craved had evaporated, leaving her in a terrifying freefall. Back in the small town outside Fort Matthews, the rebellion was not just digital, it was real. The owner of the hardware store, a stoic Army veteran, took a piece of cardboard and a thick magic marker and wrote, "The landing strip stood for vets. We stand with the landing strip." He taped it to his front door. The owner of the auto shop across the street saw it and did the same. Within hours, the town was blooming with these makeshift battle flags, a silent, powerful chorus of support. The community was drawing its own line in the sand, choosing its side with unequivocal clarity. But for Ben Carter, the hero of the story, there was no victory. There was only the suffocating darkness of his own small apartment. He sat on the edge of his bed, the television on mute showing his own face, his own trembling hands, a public spectacle of his own brokenness. Every news report felt like an indictment. He was a curse, a walking disaster zone who left wreckage in his wake. He had destroyed the one safe place he had in the world and ruined the life of the one person who had shown him unwavering kindness. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. His breath hitched, the familiar vice of a panic attack squeeze in his chest. Ranger, his loyal shadow, whined and pushed his head forcefully into Ben's lap, trying to anchor him to the present, to pull him back from the precipice. Ben's phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand, a hateful reminder of his infamy. He ignored it. He was retreating, shutting down. But through the fog of self-loathing, a primal piece of his training clawed its way to the surface. A Marine under fire does not surrender. He calls for support. He doesn't have a fire team anymore, but he has a memory. His hands, shaking so badly he could barely control them, fumbled for his phone. He scrolled through his contacts, past names of men who were now just ghosts, until he found the one he was looking for. SGM Croft. He pressed the call button, his heart hammering against his ribs. 2 towns over, a phone rang. A calm, steady voice answered. "Croft?" "Sergeant Major," Ben gasped, his voice a ragged, broken thing. It's Carter. I messed up. Sergeant Major, I messed up so bad." He poured out the story, a torrent of shame and guilt and despair. Sergeant Major Croft listened. He did not interrupt. He did not judge. He simply absorbed the story, the silence on his end of the line, a vast, reassuring presence. When Ben finally choked to a halt, the silence stretched for a long moment. Then, Croft's voice came through the speaker, not loud, but carrying the weight of an entire battalion. It was a voice of absolute certainty. "Stay put, son," he ordered. "The Marines are coming." The promise was kept not with a whisper, but with the earth-shaking rumble of thunder. It began as a distant guttural growl that vibrated through the soles of the shoes of everyone on Main Street. Conversations faltered. People turned from shop windows, their faces etched with confusion and awe. This was not the sound of common traffic. This was the sound of purpose. Cresting the hill was not a disorganized mob, but a disciplined, terrifyingly beautiful display of military might. 2 armored Humvees, their lights silently strobing, moved to either end of the block, sealing it off with silent, immovable authority. Behind them, in perfect, synchronized formation, came 3 massive 7-ton trucks, their diesel engines growling in unison. They didn't just find parking spots in front of the landing strip. They executed a flawless tactical maneuver, forming a 3-point wall of steel and olive drab that blockaded the cafe from the world. A final command vehicle, a nest of antennas on its roof, pulled directly in front of the glass doors, its engine idling like a patient beast. The hiss of air brakes was a collective sigh. Then, silence. For a full 3 seconds, nothing happened. The world held its breath. And then, as if commanded by a single invisible nerve, doors opened. Boots hit the pavement. 24 United States Marines, clad not in the polished ceremony of dress blues, but in the grim utility of their working camouflage, dismounted and formed a silent, unmoving cordon. They were not there for a parade. They were there for an operation. From the command vehicle emerged a single figure, Sergeant Major Croft. He was a man who seemed to have been carved from the very bedrock of the Marine Corps. Authority radiated from him not as a function of rank, but as an intrinsic quality of his soul. He moved with a slow, deliberate cadence that made the frantic energy of the local police officer, who was trying to reason with a babbling Ms. Evans, look foolish and insignificant. Croft's boots struck the pavement with the heavy finality of a judge's gavel. He entered the cafe, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. He paid no attention to the sputtering inspector, Mr. Harrison, or the ashen-faced Ms. Evans. His gaze swept past them as if they were furniture. Instead, he walked directly to the Wall of Honor, the crowded corkboard that was the heart of Clara's sanctuary. He stood before it for a long moment, his eyes scanning the faces of the young men and women frozen in time. He recognized some. He gently, reverently touched the corner of a faded photograph of a young Marine smiling in front of a helicopter. Then he turned. He finally looked at the 2 corporate functionaries. His voice, when it came, was not a roar. It was quieter and far more dangerous. It was a low, gravelly instrument of absolute command. "You 2, he began, "are standing in a place you do not understand, and you have passed judgment on a man you are not worthy of knowing." He took one slow, deliberate step towards Mr. Harrison. "You," he said, the word a pinpoint of focused contempt, "called that dog a hazard." Croft let the accusation hang in the dead air. "Let me tell you about that hazard." The sergeant major's voice transported them all from the small-town cafe to a sun-blasted, chaotic marketplace in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. "We were on patrol, moving through a crowd. Hot, tense. The air smelled like dust and fear. Ben Carter was on point. Ranger was his eyes and ears. Halfway across the square, Ranger, who had been working his sweep pattern like a machine, suddenly stopped. He sat down. He refused to move. The squad leader gave the hand signal to press on. Ranger didn't budge. He just stared at a pile of discarded fruit crates next to a vendor's stall. Croft's eyes were distant, seeing the scene as if it were yesterday. Carter knew his dog. He trusted him more than he trusted his own eyes. He called a halt, violating patrol protocol. He said, "My dog has something." Some of the younger guys grumbled. "We brought up the EOD tech." The sergeant major leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The tech swept the area. Nothing." He gave the all-clear. But Ranger still wouldn't move. He began to whine, a low, desperate sound. Ben knelt beside him and said to the team leader, "Sir, with all due respect, my dog says there's something there." The lieutenant, thank God, listened to the Marine who knew his equipment. They dismantled the entire fruit stand, and underneath a false floor in one of the crates, they found it. A new type of pressure plate IED, built with a non-metallic trigger designed to be invisible to our sweepers. It was wired to a daisy chain of 3 150mm artillery shells buried in the walls of the surrounding buildings. It wasn't meant to wound one man. It was meant to vaporize a whole platoon and half the marketplace with it. He looked from Harrison's terrified face to Evans's. That hazard you were so worried might shed on your floor saved the lives of 12 United States Marines and countless Afghan civilians that day. You didn't just disrespect a Marine. You spat on the grave of every man who didn't come home because a dog like that wasn't there to save him. Croft straightened up and turned to the open door, where his Marines stood ramrod straight. He didn't shout his next command. He didn't have to. "This place," he announced, his voice ringing with the clarity of a bell, "has been dishonored. It has been contaminated by cowardice. We're going to clean it up." It was a command none of them had ever heard, yet all of them understood perfectly. A ripple of motion went through the ranks. From the back of a 7-ton truck, they produced buckets, long-handled brushes, squeegees, and cleaning supplies. With a terrifying, silent efficiency, they descended on the exterior of the landing strip. They started scrubbing the windows until they gleamed. They power-washed the sidewalks, blasting away months of dirt and grime. They formed a line and swept the entire parking lot. It was a field day, a classic top-to-bottom military deep cleaning. It was a breathtaking act of symbolic warfare, a nonviolent, deeply aggressive cleansing of the corporate filth that had desecrated a sacred space. They were restoring its honor, one methodical, synchronized scrub at a time, for the whole world to see. The footage of the Marines' field day was the kill shot. It was an act of such profound, disciplined loyalty that it rendered all corporate spin obsolete. It was a viral video that showcased honor cleansing the stain of greed. For the multinational real estate corporation, the story was no longer a PR crisis. It was a full-blown brand catastrophe. The stock price shuddered, and the board of directors, men who only understood the language of money, finally understood they were bleeding. The response was as swift as it was soulless. Ms. Evans and Mr. Harrison were unceremoniously fired, their careers sacrificed as offerings to the angry gods of public opinion. A team of smooth, expensive executives was flown into Fort Matthews, their faces arranged in masks of deep sincerity. They held a press conference in the now immaculate parking lot of the landing strip. They spoke of re-evaluating their values and learning from this regrettable incident. They offered Clara a groveling public apology, and then they made her the offer they were certain would end the nightmare: her cafe back, with the lease waived for 5 years, and a tax-free 6-figure settlement to compensate for her emotional distress. It was a king's ransom, designed to buy her silence and put a neat, tidy price tag on her integrity. Clara Foster stepped up to the podium, looking not at the executives, but at the news cameras that represented the millions of people who had stood with her. She was no longer just a cafe owner. She was the commander of an army she never knew she had. She listened to their offer, and then, with a voice that was calm, clear, and utterly unbreakable, she gave them her answer. No. A stunned silence fell over the gathered press. "Thank you for the offer," she continued, her words a masterclass in polite, devastating refusal. "But you cannot give me back what you took, because you fundamentally do not understand what it was. This cafe was never a property on a balance sheet. It was a promise, and a promise cannot be bought or sold." She turned her gaze directly to the main camera. Your settlement offer is generous, but I cannot accept it for myself. However, I will accept it as the first donation to a new mission." In that moment, watching the blood drain from the executives' faces, Clara realized the power they had inadvertently given her. They had tried to make her a victim, but the community had made her a weapon. That very day, the Articles of Incorporation were filed. With the settlement money as seed capital and the hundreds of thousands of dollars that had poured in from every state in the Union, the Co-Pilot Foundation was born. Its mission was Clara's own, magnified 1,000 times, to build a national network of mentorship and support, ensuring no veteran ever had to navigate their re-entry into the civilian world alone. And her first flagship initiative was pure Master Sergeant Foster, pragmatic, efficient, and built for results. It was called the Trade Up for Vets program. It wasn't another therapy group or a wellness retreat. It was a direct pipeline to a new life. The foundation forged powerful alliances with trade unions, community colleges, and local businesses. It provided full-ride scholarships and paid, hands-on apprenticeships for veterans to become welders, electricians, plumbers, and aircraft mechanics. Clara knew that for a person who had spent their life as a warrior and a builder, the most powerful therapy was a set of tools, the challenge of a complex problem, and the profound dignity of a skilled trade. 6 months later, the scene was a world away from the tense silence of the abandoned café. On a plot of land right outside the main gate of Fort Matthews, donated by the grateful city council, a crowd had gathered. They stood before the steel skeleton of a new building, the future headquarters of the foundation. The mood was not one of anger or vindication, but of joyful, powerful creation. Clara stood at a makeshift podium, no longer in a flour-dusted apron, but in the sharp blazer of a CEO. The CEO of a multi-million-dollar nonprofit she had willed into existence. On the stage with her was her new command team. Sergeant Major Croft, his formidable presence now a pillar of support for the Foundation's board of directors, had found a new way to serve his people. And beside him stood Ben Carter. The transformation was staggering. The man who had once been unable to meet a stranger's eye now stood tall, his own gaze clear and steady. The tremor in his hands was gone, replaced by a confident stillness. He was the Foundation's director of peer outreach, his own harrowing journey now a beacon of hope for others. At his feet, Ranger lay calmly, no longer a shield against anxiety, but a proud partner in his owner's newfound strength. When Clara spoke, her voice resonated with the force of her journey. 6 months ago, a man was told he didn't belong because of his scars. A woman was told her code of honor was a fireable offense. An act of injustice tried to shut one small door. And in response, a nation of patriots, veterans, and decent people blew the walls off the building. The crowd roared. "They wanted to write a check to fix a problem," she continued, her voice ringing with passion. "But you all proved that honor doesn't have a price. You proved that our country's greatest asset isn't our wealth, but our willingness to stand for one another. This building isn't just a headquarters. It is a testament to that truth. It is a promise, built of steel and concrete, and the unbreakable spirit of this community, that here, in this place, no one who served will ever be told they don't belong again." The story of the landing strip was over, but the story of Clara Foster's mission had just begun. She had faced down hate and had answered not with more hate, but by building something beautiful and permanent. She had proven that the most powerful response to an act designed to break a person down is to build 1,000 others up. In the ashes of one small cafe, She had laid the foundation for an airbase of hope, ready to launch a new generation of heroes into the next chapter of their lives. In the end, this was never a story about a dog in a cafe. It wasn't about a corporate policy or a petty inspector. It was a story about the soul of a promise. The promise a nation makes to its warriors. A promise that says, when you come home, scarred and weary, we will not see you as a liability. We will see you as a hero. We will be your sanctuary. We will be your landing strip.